I'm Amy Aldenderfer. I have been working in extension in Hardin County, which is about the middle of the state, since 1995. So you can do the math. That's over 25 years. I love it here. I love my job because every day is different. Even during COVID, things are different. I've been doing this a long time. You really, this is kind of like, does anybody else listen to NPR, Stump the Chump? You can stump the chump. You can hurt the horticulturalist with a question. It really won't hurt me, but I can try to answer anything that's going on. Like I said before we kind of started, the first 30 minutes of my day this morning was taking a shop vac and sucking up all the stink bugs that are in the hallways in the office. Anybody else have stink bug problems? We are looking to plug all of our holes that we got. We have a brand new office. It's only a couple years old, but there's a little hole around the locking mechanism of the door that shuts, and they're getting in that way, and they're looking for places to hibernate. So we're going to try to, I don't know, MacGyver something to keep that hole closed. So I think I sucked up about 3 pounds of stink bugs. And it's very true that if you aggravate a stink bug, they smell like cilantro. The only problem with that is if you're wearing a mask while you're doing it, the smell gets in your mask and you smell cilantro for the rest of the day. So we had to swap out masks this morning. I'm like, and I don't like cilantro. I know I'm one of those weird people, but for me, it tastes like soap. So, all right. There's almost 25. Oh, Mary's got a question. Yay. How do you kill Bermuda grass? Now is not the time to try. It's going to go dormant as soon as we get some cold weather, like our first frost. It's going to turn brown. So Bermuda grass is hard, and I'm assuming it's in a lawn. So in May or June, when it starts to green up, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. What you're going to do is you're going to mow it really low. Drop that mower down as far as you can in May. Scalp it. Whatever comes back green, spray it with a non-selective herbicide. The trick of Bermuda grass is not only does it have runners that go across the top of the soil, they have runners that go underneath the soil. So what's going to pop back up is going to be what's coming up from the root system and the rhizomes that grow underneath. So you're going to scalp. Now, when you scalp it, if you can, collect the clippings, because every time there's a node on that plant, it can grow a new plant. That's why it's so aggressive. So collect all those clippings in a bag it up. If you're a good composter, you can compost that. I would just tend to throw that away. And then spray wait a week, spray it, because you're going to do this all summer. And then once it's time to sow your grass seed, like Kentucky 31, that's when you're going to go ahead and do that, which is about mid-August to about this week in September. I had to look at the calendar. So it's going to probably take you all summer to do that. So just be prepared, but you can do it that way, or you can rent a sod cutter, but you've got to get those rhizomes out from underneath the soil. And that's where your kind of bank is for that Bermuda grass, to get it out underneath there. Annette, do you have any other suggestions for how to kill Bermuda grass?
No, I don't have any other suggestions.
Okay.
And for that, well, I think you did pretty good.
Okay. I was like, it's tough. It is tough. And some people just kind of go, I'm going to just leave it. But yeah, you really have to get those rhizomes out of the ground there. All right.
We have
My daughter.
Oh, go ahead, Kathy. Or Sharon.
Sharon.
Okay.
Okay, I was just going to say as an aside,
Okay.
my daughter recently moved to Florida, and she's been sending me lots of pictures of her and the dogs and things. And one of the pictures she sent me, I was shocked because it was looking down at the dog and everything. She was in a dog park, and it was Bermuda grass. And I immediately went, oh, and then I thought, oh no, she's in Florida. That's where it's supposed to be. Okay, it's good. That's just,
Yeah, the cool thing about Bermuda grass is you can mow it like, oh, really short, like an inch. And it'll be fine. But I don't mow that often, so I don't let mine get that short. So, for that. So,
Yeah, there's another question.
is there another question? Okay, what's the question?
Do you have any recommendations for small, under 15 feet tall, as for example, evergreen trees for a new border perennial garden that is only about 12 feet wide?
So, okay, so small, evergreen, and 12 feet wide. Oh gosh. Is it in the sun or the shade, Diane? She didn't know it was coming back with a question.
I'm not seeing an answer yet, but you
Okay.
can.
I would assume with it would be like a sun.
It does say sun.
Oh, does it say sun? Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, sun. Okay. All right. Let's see. Oh, we have a really good publication called Tree Shrubs, Ground Covers, and Vines for Kentucky. It's HO 61. It's an oldie but a goodie because it lists the trees or the woody plants by size, and then if it's evergreen or deciduous. So I'm gonna consult the list. It's just a list, basically. So anything under 15 feet tall. So we've got evergreen trees, large shrubs that are 10 to 25 feet tall. But it's only 12 feet wide, so that's going to be an issue. There are some varieties of juniper, holly, arborvitae, and I said holly. I think there's a boxwood that are what they call pencil shaped, and literally they just grow straight up. So that would be something I would look for. They're very popular right now because, especially in a perennial garden where you want that evergreen, that you want color there all the time. It just kind of gives you, in the design field, it gives you that accent point that you can kind of scatter. But if it's only, it's 12 feet wide. Oh, good grief. I thought you said 12 inches. Okay. Well, that's an option. You could do those little pencil point junipers or hollies, boxwood, arborvitae. They do pretty well, and they do get tall, but they don't get that tall. Let's see, 12 feet wide. So yeah, you could go with some. I would probably go with some more upright varieties. The other thing is those evergreen shrubs that are more pencil point wouldn't shade your perennial garden as much as something that's much bigger. And all of those will do okay in sun. The hollies, I think, are the Japanese hollies. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. And they have little tiny leaves, and they may need more acidic soil. So do a soil test and check and see what that is. But I think the arborvitaes and some of those other things will be fine. I know the junipers will be fine with whatever soil you have on there. Let's see, under 15 feet. There's, if you've got a more wet soil, you could do some Canadian hemlocks. There's some smaller pines. And then there's a little tiny, what I like to call little tiny green meatballs. It's actually a Chamaecyparis. That would be another option. That is just a little, it literally gets 2 feet tall and 2 feet wide. Little tiny ball. Put that to the front so you can see it and not lose it. But there's a lot of evergreens out there. But yeah, check HO 61. It's a really good publication. Did I answer your question? Okay, good. Okay. Anybody else? It's gonna be a really short lesson.
Any other questions, please?
We've only been on for 8 minutes.
Is now the correct time to maybe divide perennials if they need to be divided? And if it is, can you maybe give us the quick and dirty on how to do that?
Yes. Oh, there's Laura. Yeah, you can divide perennials now. And the quick and dirty answer is the reasoning behind when to divide perennials is when they start to melt out in the middle. So you get all your perennials around the outside and there's nothing in the middle. So then you can like chop it up into pie shapes and move them, or at least spread them out and kind of put some back in that same spot. The thing about moving perennials is you want to make sure that you keep them watered at least until the ground freezes. So we'll get a frost like, well, in this part of the state, in the middle part of the state, we usually get it about the 3rd or 4th week of October, but then the ground doesn't freeze until like November, December. So it can be really cold and it can get cold, but the ground doesn't freeze. So you want to keep that moist until the ground freezes, because if you're in Kentucky, Lord love the state, is in the middle of the country and we can get freezing and thawing throughout the winter. So you need to make sure that those perennials, once you get that ground frozen, put some mulch over the top to keep it frozen so that it doesn't push that plant back out as that ground freezes and thaws. So there's lots of things you can do, and we're kind of getting to the end of the perennial dividing season. I wouldn't wait too very much longer. Maybe, I know we're supposed to get rain this weekend, but maybe early next week would be probably the latest that I would divide perennials, because I'd hate for them not to be able to put their roots out, and they'll put their roots out in the soil until the soil reaches about 40 degrees, and then they'll stop growing. So at that time they stop growing, they're just kind of stuck, and hopefully that ground doesn't freeze them, push them out of the soil. Sometimes I'll go out in January and go out on a warm day, and I'll just kind of squish my perennials back in because they've kind of heaved out a little bit. So, make sure you divide them, water them until the ground freezes, and then make sure that they get a good layer of mulch when that ground does freeze, so it doesn't unfreeze and refreeze. Did I answer your question? Did I get all of the question answered?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
In
you.
fact, it wasn't me who asked it, but that's okay.
Okay.
I like all the information. The question I have is, this has been such a wonderful year for weeds to grow.
Yes, it has.
How do I get rid of them?
The easy, well, where are your weeds? Let me ask you that.
Oh, they're in my perennial garden.
Okay. The best thing to do right now is to pull them out before they flower. Because if they
Well,
flower,
they
they're gonna
have
set
gone to seed already,
Yeah,
and that is really bad, I know.
yeah, because you
Need
just added
more
to the
and
bag.
more and more.
Mhm. So pull them out because they're too big right now to spray. And they're kind of on the downhill slope anyway. The spray is not gonna do any good. You're gonna
Oh, really?
go pull them out. At this time of year, plants are pretty much shut down for the season. You save your money, don't spray. Pull them out. The ground is nice and soft, so it's easy to pull them out. And you get a big pile of weeds, and you feel like you've accomplished a lot because you have this giant pile. I have it too, a giant pile of weeds, and I'm like, I got a lot done today. I only worked for 30 minutes, but I have a giant pile of weeds.
Oh, I
And then,
know.
so pull them out. Make sure that you put on a good 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch. That'll kind of suppress them. You can use, depending on what your plan is for the garden, you can use a pre-emergent herbicide, which just puts on a layer of, it's a chemical barrier that doesn't allow seeds to germinate. Now, if you got plants and annuals that come back from seed every year, not a good idea. So when you do that, you need to make sure that you're not expecting the zinnias or the cleome or any of those things to come back, because they won't.
Oh, I don't grow those kind of things.
Right. So if it's just strictly perennials and you're good with that, then just let them go and be fine with that. I usually use a little pre-emergent herbicide out there just to make sure that sometimes those like early spring weeds, if I get everything, you have to get everything really clean before you put it on there. Put it on there and then put your mulch on the top and you should be good for at least a season. Then reapply next spring before things start to get crazy.
We do what?
Put
Next-
down your pre-emergent herbicide now, after you
That's
clean
right.
out your beds, you got to get all the weeds out of there. Clean out your beds, put down your pre-emergent herbicide, mulch now.
Now,
In the
yes,
spring, you're going to reapply your pre-emergent herbicide to keep to reinforce that chemical barrier to keep seeds from germinating.
okay.
And then mulch again.
And
Mulch is good. And you
yes,
can mulch with anything. Be it leaf, chopped up leaves. I wouldn't do grass clippings as much because you might have some for that Bermuda grass in there. You don't want that in your flower bed. But pine bark, hardwood, it's all the same. Yeah.
okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I appreciate that because the weeds are like, I have been pulling weeds. I mean stacks of weeds.
We've had a very good year for enough rain throughout the summer to keep them going.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a question about greenhouses. How do you clean your greenhouse to protect from viruses?
I'm assuming plant viruses, and plant viruses are vectored by insects. So you got to keep the insects out. So you can either screen. That means putting like window screen, but I think it's a tighter window screen than normal on there. But yeah, you have to keep the aphids and the thrips and all those little sucking plant pests from that's what transmits the viruses. But once your plant has a virus, you need to get it out of there because the whole plant is infected. So if you know that you have a virus, then take the plant and throw it away. Don't keep it, don't compost it, just throw it away for that. But yeah, you have to you have to control the insects to control the viruses.
Okay. Then there's another question. When is the best time to take cuttings from hydrangeas? I guess this is for propagation.
Hydrangea propagation is usually after okay, thank you, Sharon. It's like hydrangeas are usually propagated usually June or July. And I usually take 4 nodes, 1, 2, 3, 4, because I want 2 underneath the soil and 2 in the above. So usually about June or July. They like to do like hardwood, semi-hardwood cuttings for that. And then yes, use preened in the spring, which is a pre-emergent herbicide, which I really should take stock of.
Amy has another question. When do you recommend to collect soil for a soil sample test in the vegetable garden?
That's a good question. I usually take it in the fall, and I know that's a little controversial because, well, I'll tell you why, because we usually have less soil tests coming in the fall, and you get your soil test back really quickly, or the results back, but then you can, what we test for in a soil test won't change between fall and spring very much, because we don't test for nitrogen. It's just a straight recommendation for nitrogen. But usually after I clean up in the fall, the soil's easy to dig. If you do it in the middle of summer, it's kind of hard to dig through there. But I would do it now. Like when you've cleaned up, or when you're tired of vegetable gardening and you've cleaned everything up, take a soil test and then send that off. And then the second thing is you have to remember where you put the results. And I wouldn't put the fertilizer on in the fall because there's nothing there to hold it. I would wait until you start planting in the spring to put your fertilizer on there, but you should take your test now. It's just as easy. You can wait in the spring, but we get farmers, at least in our office, that bring like hundreds of soil test at the time. And if you have one or two, you get kind of thrown in that big bunch. So,
Amy, what about if my recommendation asks for lime? When should I put the lime one in?
oh, the lime can be put on at any time. Yes, if your recommendation says put on lime, because it takes about 5 or 6 months for that lime to activate and pull that pH down. No, wait a minute, push the pH up. Sorry, lime goes up. So yeah, you can put that on right now, but if you've got your soil test back, you want to wait and put your phosphorus and potassium on in the spring, especially your nitrogen on in the spring when your plants are there to take it out.
Okay, we have another question.
Sure.
Do you have to dig up dahlias or gladiolicorms here in the fall? So I guess it depends on what zone, because I guess maybe Kentucky has more than one climatic zone.
It does. So here in central Kentucky, we recommend that. Yes. Our winters are kind of weird. And we can get really, really cold, and dahlias and gladiola, especially the hybrid gladiola, are not as hardy. So I would definitely pull those. Kathy, in your neck of the woods, because Kathy's in far west Paducah, do you all dig yours?
Yeah, still. Yeah,
You
we're in
still dig
zone 7. Of course, it depends on what it says when they purchase the corms,
Right.
you know, about the hardiness zone. But yeah, I do recommend digging them up.
I do. And there's a trick. Not so much with dahlias, but with gladiolas. I always plant them in a pot in the soil. So when I pull them up, whoop, I just pop the whole pot out. You could do that with dahlias if you get a big enough pot. And then what I do is shake the soil off the dahlias and the corms, and I put the pot back in the hole if I'm going to reuse that same space. They're like, oh, that dahlia looks pretty good right there. I'm going to use the same space, and I'll just plop that pot back in the hole. And it kind of saves me from having to store the pot somewhere and redig in the hole. That's a good question.
Yeah. There's another question that's come in. What is your favorite tomato variety?
Well, that's a hard question because I don't like to eat fresh tomatoes. But I do have some, I did grow a new variety this year called Akasawa. And so I was going to make tomato paste and make tomato sauce. And it grew pretty well. I had the other, I guess I can say this on Zoom. The other variety I grew was called cow tit. And I would say that these are Roma-esque in shape, but they were more candelabras or candle type because they're really long and round. So if you sliced them across, they were about this big around, but they were all meat. Oh my gosh, they made the best sauce. So that was my new favorite variety right now. But I have really done a lot with, there's one called Spoon. That was my favorite. And it was about the size of a pea for salads. But I really like some of the odd. There's an indigo. Is it indigo? That's more of a blue or a purple variety. There's an indigo cherry that's about this big. Very pretty color. I like the yellow pear. Stuff that I can kind of cook up or make a good salsa out of. But I don't eat like a tomato on it. Are there any other options out there for people? Kathy, Sharon, Annette, any other agents?
I don't know that I have a favorite variety, but I do know, especially for beginners who are growing tomatoes maybe in their yard for the first time, you probably want to look for a tomato plant that is resistant, because I know especially around where I'm in central Kentucky, and we get early blight and all of that sort of thing. So you might want to, just to make it easy on yourself, start off with something that's resistant. And then once the viruses and things like that, and then once you get that under your belt, then loop out to some of those other varieties. And Amy, I would like to, if you can send me some of those names again in an email, I might be interested in trying some of those too.
The ID 133, which is our vegetable cultivars publication. I'm going to try to put the link in the chat, but that one really has a lot of those easy to grow vegetables, and they've been proven, those varieties have been proven to work well in Kentucky. So if in doubt, if you're a new person, or if you just want to try a different one and see which ones kind of do well here, then that would be a place where I would start for those. And I will put that link here in the.
While you're doing that, somebody typed in indigo rose as one of the tomato varieties that you were talking about.
Yes, that's it. I knew it was indigo something.
And then Bud wanted to remark that here in Paducah that if you want to overwinter your gladiolas, the corms, you can put a heavy mulch layer over them after the cold weather sets in.
Absolutely.
So, it like I say, depends on the winter. We've had a winter where it got down to 17 below about 2015. So it can get cold here too.
Absolutely.
Right,
Okay.
that's why I would caution against, leaving, especially if you've got gladiola bulbs or whatever, like that tender bulbs that, was passed down from your grandma or your neighbor who died several years ago. Anything you want to keep here in Kentucky, I would go ahead and try to dig them up and keep them properly over the winter, because you just never know when we might get some kind of crazy weather where for a week or 2 weeks, it's below whatever. And I wouldn't want your tender bulbs to be killed just because.
Or you're out there
Because
digging
of
in
that.
the middle of January because there's an Arctic vortex coming down, and you're like,
Exactly. So, because I've gotten away with leaving them in the ground before, but if it were something that somebody special gave to me or something, or came from the old home place, I would make sure I went ahead and dug them up anyway.
absolutely, absolutely.
Very good. Here's a new questions come in. We have set out several red cedars over the years. Now they are dying one by one, except for the first two planted years ago. No obvious problem. So anybody have any ideas?
Are they eastern red cedars?
It just says red cedars. You want to, Laura, you want to reply back to what they were?
'Cause those are like native. They should be. Now, just because they're native doesn't mean that they don't need some care, and
Yes, they're red cedars.
they're reds,
Okay.
they're junipers,
Locally.
because sometimes
Dug
there's
up locally. We
cedar.
dug them up. We dug them up out of the woods locally.
Oh, that might have been the problem. When you dig a plant out of the woods, they tend to have a very fine, diverse root system. And if you don't dig a big enough ball, you may lose 98% of the root system.
But they,
Well, these have been growing for like 10 years.
In the same spot?
Yes.
Huh. I don't know.
We've had trouble with excessively wet soil here in Paducah over the
Mm.
past 5 years. They call it pluvial, Pluvial, and that is a contributing factor to loss of some of our woody plants.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we've had some well, especially this past spring it rained every 3 days.
Yeah, it was. It was very.
Yeah, so I mean, that could be a contributing factor. Absolutely. So we're gonna go with
And-
environmental problems.
I was going to say with digging them up and planting them, they may survive for, 3, 5, 10 years, but they may be stressed during all that time. And so it just takes some little something that changes that finally puts that tree over the edge, and they all begin to die. So.
never look stressed.
Kind of limp along until they kind of crap out.
These never looked stressed. They just died suddenly. So that's, it's just kind of a crazy thing.
Because there's not really a good insect that would do that. Well, sure. Talk to your local extension agent. Send them some samples. Wait, am I your extension agent, Laura?
Yes, you are. Okay, now
Send me some samples.
samples.
Well,
Okay, so
we'll talk offline and we'll see what we can do.
okay.
We'll work on it.
Okay, here,
Oh,
here's a good,
did Bud ask about when the first frost is?
up for discussion across the Commonwealth, I'd say.
Yes. And I believe Bud is in Paducah. So when is
Yes.
it? When's the first frost in Paducah?
Well, we've had it as early as October the 5th and as late as November the 1st. Sorry, December the 1st. So a range of, it depends. So right now we're supposed to be in a mild weather pattern till we just have the projected forecast until about the middle of October at this point.
Okay.
Nothing unusual on the horizon right now.
Okay. Yeah, usually I'm along the I-65 corridor. So I usually tell people it averages the 21st of October for us. And I think if you're in Eastern Kentucky, it's like 1 to 2 weeks earlier than that. So I think it kind of, it depends on your zone. But yeah, it's usually in October. But that's about as far as I can get close to you. Anybody from the eastern part of the state want to chime in with when their first frost is?
Suzanne Stumbo's online.
Is she on there? Okay.
She wants to-
Suzanne would know. Be on this call?
if she's where she can answer, she may be.
Oh, okay. She
I
would.
I
Well,
was thinking about doing a dozen things at once. Usually, I have before got stuff all the way up to November in a really unusual year. But Pike County's kind of strange because part of it goes with all the southern stuff and part of it goes with northern. We're kind of an oddity for the for the state on soils and for weather and everything. Everything puts us in a different category. So
Sure.
I would say mid to late October, or at least mid-October most of the time.
So that's you had a plan on that. And if you get a few extra weeks of tomato growing weather, well, then that's all much better.
I've even picked tomatoes at Thanksgiving before on a really odd year.
Mhm. That's true. Have done that. Sorry. Goodness, good questions. Good questions.
Oh, we might want to talk about folks that have green tomatoes on the vines when a frost is expected, that if you pick a tomato and it has a white star on the underside where it's a green tomato, if you can see sort of a white star on the blossom end of it, that those tomatoes will go ahead and turn red. If you just take them off.
Yeah, they'll turn red, but they won't be any sweeter than a green tomato. But they won't have any more sugar in them.
True, true, true.
But they're
They'll
still
taste
nice
like
to
those
eat.
store-bought ones.
Yeah, but as Kathy was talking about, they're still nice to eat at Thanksgiving when you don't want to have to buy a tomato and it's still from the garden. It still has acceptable flavor for
Yes.
Thanksgiving, but it's definitely not a summer tomato, but still it's a great way to save those green ones that are turned to the stage where they will go ahead and ripen.
Yep. I'm glad y'all are on this call because I don't know why I whispered that. I don't usually eat tomatoes, but yeah. I hear they're pretty good.
Another thing about for people that pick those green tomatoes, it is better to set them with the blossom end down to allow them to turn red. The shoulders or the top part of the tomato, they're more soft and more likely to bruise. So it's better actually to put your tomato upright instead of upside down when you're putting them away to turn red.
And don't ever put your tomatoes, even the ripe ones, in the refrigerator. That'll turn the flavor off. So
Yes, good.
even in the summertime, don't put them in the refrigerator. I've been trying to get my mother not to do that for years, but she insists.
Yes, you're right.
That's why they're out there with the potatoes in the grocery store. They don't get refrigerated. Awesome. All right, are we done? It's only like 20 minutes. Any other questions? There's been a lot of people on this call that just haven't said anything. So.
Well, now that it's almost October, what would be some garden chores that we need to do to put our garden to bed?
Oh, that's some good question. That's a good question. Well, I would definitely not be pruning my shrubs or my trees at this point in time. Because if you make a cut, then that cut's going to be open until springtime. So kind of hold that pruning, excuse me, off until the spring. But any of those perennials that can kind of be deadheaded would be okay. Weed, definitely weed. You can mulch a little bit. You kind of keep that ground a little warmer depending on when you mulch. So you can kind of keep that warmer into the winter, especially if you transplanted some perennials. If you planted your pansies out there, make sure those are good and mulched. You can plant your fall stuff out. I really like planting pansies out at this time of year because they look so good. There's some color out there over the winter, because if it's a mild winter and there's no snow, they'll be blooming throughout the winter. And then in the springtime, when it gets warms up, then they bloom a whole lot better. You'll get a whole lot more bloom out of them in the springtime because they're already in the ground, and you don't have to wait for that ground to dry out enough to plant them in there. So I always plant my pansies in the fall. If you've got ornamental cabbages and kales, those are great to put in. Those get a little kind of funky when it gets really cold. Decorate for Halloween, decorate for the season. Put your handbells out there. I like to mulch and just kind of clean up. Although I don't usually prune my perennials back to the ground. I usually leave a good 12 inches of stem, because in my neighborhood, we have a lot of trees, and those tree leaves will collect in those stems, and they'll protect the crowns. I've done it a couple of different ways, but I tend to leave about 12 to 18 inches of stem. And it does, those perennials just do a little bit better. If I had turf grass, I'd be mowing still at the regular height. I tend not to mow. I mow late. I'll mow into November if it needs it, but I'll try to keep those leaves up off the grass, because as the leaves come off the trees, that turf is getting more light. And I have a very shady yard, so hopefully that light will help that turf grass survive. You can, if you've taken a soil test, you can fertilize your lawn. Sometimes I do that like the day after Thanksgiving, because I don't tend to go shopping on Black Friday. So I can usually fertilize then. What else do we have? Vegetable garden, clean out the vegetable garden. If you've got your fall garden in already, which you should have done in August, if you've got lettuces, just kind of keep things cleaned up. If you've got dormant beds, go ahead and put a good layer of mulch over the top of those and let them go. And get ready for spring. Sometimes if you do really early peas or potatoes, you can prep your beds in the fall. And if you hill them, like put little furrows, like I'm thinking raised beds, but you can do it in just a regular garden, vegetable garden. Those will dry out and warm up a little faster than what's in the furrow. And you can plant your peas and potatoes on the tops of those hills, and you'll get your garden in a little faster. And then you don't have to wait for all that soil to dry out, because usually in the spring it's pretty mucky, rainy, muddy, whatever. Is there anything else I've missed? I've cut vegetables, flowers,
Lot of good
compost.
tips. Thank you.
I was gonna say compost. Put everything in the compost. Compost as much as you can. And I'm a lazy composter, so I throw mine in a pile. Oh, when is a good time to plant trees? Good question. Now is a good time to plant trees. Just like the perennials, you're gonna plant them according to Yucca Yellows. But you can plant them usually up until about the 1st of November. And then that'll kind of get them settled in. But remember to water. That's the thing that we forget, is that in the autumn it tends to be a little drier. And we want to water until that ground freezes, not just when we get our first frost, whenever that is for your area. But yeah, now is an excellent time to plant trees. Although there are some trees that they really recommend planting in the spring. And apparently there's a list of them on the website, but I don't remember what they are. Yeah, the fall, you can pretty much plant everything in the fall. Some of the magnolias, and some of like the Dahlias, or sorry, not the Dahlias, the Budlias, like the butterfly bushes, you want to plant those in the spring. But most everything you can plant in the fall. It's on usually as soon as you get a blade in the ground. Usually September, October is a good time. Oh, thanks, Suzanne. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. If you've got any type of disease in your vegetables or flowers or whatever, don't put them in the compost pile. Throw those away. Yep. And tomatoes, peppers tend to get the eastern blight, early blight, or Victoria leaf spot. So yeah, don't put those in the and squash can have that squash vine borer. So, southern blight. Oh, you have southern blight, Kathy, where you're at. Good bad. Our butterfly bush is invasive in Kentucky. They can be. Some of the older varieties put a lot of seed out. And then there are some varieties that don't put out a lot of seed either. So I don't remember which ones are which. Does anybody know? But yeah. And I can get more butterflies with perennial sunflower, lemon queen, than I can get with a butterfly bush. Perennial sunflowers also get like 6 feet tall, which is awesome.